As a young person growing up in Seaham, I was aware that the beaches were used as a dumping ground for colliery waste. At the time, I had no idea of the magnitude. Around 12 kilometres of shoreline were buried under a massive 2.5 million tonnes of tailings, rock and mine rubbish every single year. By 1993, all the mines had closed. When I revisited Blast Beach in 2010, I was completely taken by surprise. The change was astonishing. The coastline had enjoyed almost 20 years of natural regeneration. Nature was reclaiming what was hers. The impact of that visit was so profound and intense. I came away knowing I wanted to create work that would reflect that experience. I was truly inspired. My original aspiration for a career was actually to become an architect. I knew at the time that an architect was a creative person. There was a great ambition to earn more money than my father ever had, and those two things put together made me focus on this kind of idea. I didn't get the grades for my A-levels at school. I had to have a rethink. I applied to Sunderland Polytechnic with the idea I would become an interior designer, but when I got there, I found the ceramic department so much more interesting. I fell in love with clay. After Sunderland Poly, I went to Bath Academy of Art in Corsham, Wiltshire, and I studied ceramics to degree level. The course there was very comprehensive, but I spent most of my time sitting at the potter's wheel, throwing pots. And I also learned how to fire the big oil-fired kiln there. After the first term, Margaret came down to live, and in 1973, we got married. From very early days with Margaret as just young people, we both had the same kind of interests from a very early time. She was following a craft course at school. I was at Sunderland Poly. We would share each other's interests. We really fitted together quite easily. When I left art school, we came back to our hometown in Seaham, and I was really very lucky. I hadn't realised, but there was a pottery in Seaham. I knocked on their door, they gave me a job, and I was making dog balls for a complete year. And in that time I made 16,000 dog balls, and I didn't even have a dog. After 3 years at Seaham, we eventually got enough money together and we were able to secure a middle rig. We moved here, we built the kiln, and I made what I knew best, stuff on the potter's wheel. I made domestic ware. The first kiln note came out in 1980. I had to find somewhere to sell it. I put it in the back of the van and I drove off to the Lake District. I knocked on doors, I took orders, and that was the beginning of it all. We had a certain amount of success from that very first day. We'd been making domestic wares for really quite some time, but things were actually changing around us. The ceramic scene itself was really changing. There was lots of colour coming in, and I was becoming really quite interested in this. I was getting a little bit bored with what I was doing, just making domestics all the time. So we introduced single pieces of more adventurous work with a lot more colour in it. I thought that was the way forward. As time went on, making the multicoloured glazes that I became really quite interested in just the red element of it. I knew at the time that red was a very, very highly revered, difficult to get colour. The Japanese and the Chinese had pursued red many hundreds of years ago. Technically, to make a good red colour in high-fired ceramics, it's really rather difficult. And I have to confess, I struggled at the time. I did lots and lots of experiments, had lots of failures. Eventually, I cracked it. I was making reds on porcelain because porcelain's an excellent blank canvas for a good red glaze. So after a while, I was so confident that we were making lots of these works, and eventually we became quite renowned for making this. That colour became Curtis Red. It was our colour. When we went to Japan, we visited the Nagano Mountains. It was autumn time and the trees in the landscape were absolutely fabulous. There was every colour you could imagine. There was reds, oranges, browns, greens. It was quite an inspirational moment for me. I knew at the time, when I got home, I would want to do something about that. I had the colour palette. I got home and I didn't have a clue what to do. I messed around. I took slabs of clay. I created texture on those slabs. I stretched them. And eventually, I made a body of work that would be known as the Nagano Mountain series. And that supplemented the red porcelain very, very nicely. It ran alongside the red porcelain, and it was a real good extension of Curtis Red at the time. In 2010, I visited Blast Beach, went for a walk along the shore, and I was caught by surprise. It was such an incredible moment for me. Everything I saw was an inspiration. I was looking at remarkable colours, pebbles that were covered all over in bioxide. There was clay beds, and they were cracked and crazed, just like ceramic might be. There was a place called Red Lake, water stained red by the iron that leached out from the cliffs. Magnesian limestone as a background. The sea at the other side. It was a huge inspiration for me. It was a pivotal point, and that was the beginning of me wanting to make very, very different works. It had a big effect, an effect like I'd never ever experienced previously. I was going to make work that reflected what I saw at Blast Beach. I had to think long and hard about how I was going to respond to Blast Beach. I didn't want to replicate everything that was there. That wasn't the idea. I wanted to create something that would give either me or the viewer the same response as me. I wanted to make work that people would look at and get a very, very similar response to what I'd had at the Blast Beach. That was the essence of it. I didn't really know where to start. So I had to think about how the Blast Beach itself was created. There was layer upon layer of rubbish from the mines. There was heat from the sun. There was interaction with salt water. So all of these elements, I was wondering, how can I possibly recreate them? But then I got to thinking, if the blast beach is layers, maybe that was my way forward. Maybe I could create layers also. I'll work with ceramics. I'll build up layers of interest with various ceramic materials. I would torch them with the blowtorch till they cracked and fissured. I'd just see if I could actually reproduce the same kind of results that I was seeing on the blast beach. I struggled like mad to replicate the textures that I saw there. There are many ceramic materials available to me as a ceramic artist, but they all fell short of what I wanted to do. I needed to actually create something myself. I experimented with making various pastes and textured clays. I created texture pastes that were unique in their composition. They gave me the exact results that I wanted. I could now replicate every texture that I had seen on Blast Beach. That texture paste became so successful, the industry picked up on it, and now they produce it for me under license. The colour palette that I'm really interested in requires that I fire with fuel that will produce a flame. Partway through the firing, I cut back the oxygen. The flame needs to have oxygen, and it takes oxygen away from the glaze and the oxides that are in that glaze. That means that they will then be reduced back to a metallic kind of state. And that is the whole process of what a reduction firing means. Every time I go into the workshop, I'm very happy if I learn something new. I don't really need to go out there and look for influence anymore. The work has an inspiration on itself, if you like. It carries me forward. So if I do things ever slightly different each time, it will naturally progress. my end game is I want the final viewer, the customer, whatever, when they look at my work, I want them to be able to respond in the same way that I responded to the landscape. If I've achieved that, well, that for me is absolute success.